What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Yeti's Den. My guest today is second appearance, Saul Darius.
The one and only Better Call Saul.
You got it. And we're calling you today to talk about current events and what's going on down in the Sunshine State.
Absolutely, my hometown.
Yeah. And before we talk about some of the issues going on down there, let's just state that Florida is a beautiful place and always will be a beautiful place. And I'm sure you agree.
I do agree, yes.
Yeah, I I've been down there a total of 5 times. Once when I was a baby, and then once a year later when I was a toddler. Because my grandmother she was like a bird. She flew south for the winter, and then when I was 13, my family went down to visit her. Then we drove into Orlando to Disney World, and then we visited West Palm Beach, where my grandmother lived in when I was 17, and then again when I was 19.
Yeah.
And I thought of going to college down there. I actually got accepted to Florida Atlantic University.
Oh, nice. And Boca.
Yes. And at the time, it was described as an up and coming school. It was transitioning from a
Mhm.
computer school to a more traditional residential campus. I think the main reason I didn't go there is because I got into UMass Amherst. And at the time, UMass Amherst was the more traditional school.
Got it.
And I was really, while FAU looked really nice, a lot of me going down to Florida was just for the weather in the wintertime. And it's like you got to base, your undergraduate time more on just, as my dad said, colleges is more than just pools and palm trees.
I disagree, but okay.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Florida. Um, so Florida's gone from a a swing state, arguably a leaning red state, because while Obama won there in 2008 and 2012, Republicans were winning statewide elections.
Yeah.
But in 2018, Nikki Fried was the only Democrat who won statewide. She won to be the, the Department of Agriculture, but
Mhm.
DeSantis narrowly won. Rick Scott narrowly beat longtime Democrat Bill Nelson. I mean, another way Florida was a purple state is you always had one Democratic senator, one Republican senator. Um,
I mean, but Florida's had a Republican governor since like 2000, so
1998 when Jeb Bush
yeah.
got elected to a first term.
So I mean, yeah, it's Florida's always been a fascinating one, right? I think people started really focusing on Florida, with George Bush and Al Gore, right? That whole fiasco and the hanging Chad and everything like that. So I think that's when people really started paying attention to Florida as a political swing state. But it's always been a back and forth, and I don't think I've seen it as red as it has been. I'm trying to think back, like I'll say it this way. Personally, the first time I ever seen my parents vote Republican was for Donald Trump. They've
Wow.
always voted Democratic. And so I think really it started leaning like hardcore red in 2016, like 2015, 2016. So it's interesting to see that trend.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. In 2000, Gore actually only won 2 counties nationwide that Clinton did not win in '96. One of them was the Orange County, where Orlando's located.
Yeah. Again, how old was I when that all that happened? I was like 10. And I and I remember my parents losing their mind that Al Gore didn't win. And then learning about it years later, right? That was also kind of the first time I even heard of the electoral college and all how all of that works, right? Like as a kid, you always grow up thinking your vote matters in electing who's going to be president. Then you find out actually no, it's the electoral college, right? And who you vote in the midterms and everything like that matter more really than the actual presidential election.
Yeah. And so Orlando's still one of the few liberal places still left in Florida.
Yep.
And but from 2008 to 2012, Romney flipped Flagler County and Volusia County. Those are two counties on the East
So,
Coast, like kind of like midway between Jacksonville and West Palm Beach.
yep.
And then in 2016, uh, Trump flipped Jefferson County, which is up north, St.
Mhm.
Lucie County, which is two counties north of Palm Beach, and then Monroe County, which is that's where Key West is, which is a bit surprising because I know always been a high LGBTQ population there.
Yeah, that was a bit surprising too. Also, there's been a lot of counties that have been I've been shocked by in terms of like how much they support Trump.
Right, and I'm surprised DeSantis won Monroe County twice. Him being him pushing to paint over rainbow crosswalks and murals.
Well, I mean, that's fairly recent, right?
Yeah,
So it'll be interesting to see in the next election how those counties fare after that debacle and the most recent debacle too. Yeah.
yeah. And then in 2016, Pinellas County, Trump flipped. But then in 2020, Biden flipped Duval County for the first time since 1976. That's where Jacksonville's located.
Hmm.
He flipped Pinellas County back to the Democrat column. And then he won
Yeah, that's the example. Yep.
Seminole County, which was the first time. So Seminole County is just north of Orlando. That was
Yep.
the first time that a Democrat presidential candidate has won that county since Harry Truman got reelected in 1948.
Hmm.
So I feel like in 2020, it showed that Biden flipping those counties showed that Florida could still be competitive. But
Well, and I'll tell you what happened for with those. So a little bit of history, right? So let's start with 2020 as a major focal point, right? 2020, obviously pandemic, everything like that. So we started seeing a lot of right wing individuals coming from left wing states like New York and California moved down to Florida because of the so-called freedom they didn't get in those states, right? And Florida pretty much remained open throughout the pandemic. So you had a lot of those California, New York conservatives move down to Florida. They hit major areas like Tampa, Orlando, Miami, right? They worked remote jobs that paid New York and California salaries. So now you had these people paying ridiculously cheap prices of rent, and they were getting paid, these outrageous salaries coming from these states. And so you saw the increase in cost of living go significantly up in an unprecedented amount, right? Because of that, the people that were living there and the people that were not getting paid California and New York salaries started leaving in like 2021, 2022. Well, 2020, they really started leaving. And they relocated to different sort of counties, right? So, for example, in Orlando, in like Orange County, right? They went a little bit more north to like Seminole County, right? Same with the Hillsborough, Tampa area county going towards more of the Pinellas, which is more of forgot the name of the city that's there, but
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg. Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. You started seeing a shift in Jacksonville individuals moving out more towards the outskirts, right? And so these what used to be blue cities are now converting into red cities, and what used to be more of a purple on the outskirts, we're converting more into bluer, right? Still not completely blue, but still bluer for sure. Because people that are living in those cities were now expanding out to different counties because of the cost of living. So um, it was definitely a huge shift seeing that. And I think that, again, Biden flipped a lot of red to blue in a lot of different states, right? I think people are generally unhappy with the pandemic situation and with Trump and how he was handling it. So I wasn't necessarily surprised, but just a little bit of the trend there to kind of better understand what was going on in Florida during the pandemic. People were just not happy. People that lived in Florida, Florida natives were just not happy with their cost of living suddenly skyrocketing because all of these outside sources coming in, right? So,
Yeah. Do you feel like Miami is becoming gentrified?
oh, 100%. Oh, 100%. I mean, it's always been, but it's been slowly. It's the reason why I left Miami. I left Miami in 2016. I was raised there since I was 4 years old. So from 1994, all the way to 2016, I was a Miami native. And it was around 2010. Yeah, it was around 2010 is when I started really noticing changes happening in Miami, which later on I learned was gentrification, but it came very slowly, right? The issue with Florida, the pros is the weather, but the con is also the weather. Even though it's called the Sunshine State, it's hurricane seasons, and Florida is below sea level. And so you do get a significant amount of flooding, especially in South Florida and Miami. You get a large number of flooding. And so people didn't want to invest. Real estate didn't want to invest because there was, global warming was taken very serious, and they were claiming that Florida was going to be underwater in like 50 years, and so real
Yeah.
estate was not a thing.
In 22, it was a funny meme on social media when the red wave hit Florida. It said, Florida will go blue eventually. And it's a picture of the ocean, like all over the land.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And so it was crazy to see that, and again, pandemic changed everything quickly in Miami specifically. It's now sole gentrification. It's in. I love visiting, hate living there.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good tourist slogan. Like, it's a lot of fun to visit, but you don't have to live there, though, because it'll be very, very expensive. And speaking of
I
which,
think you made the right choice by not coming down for college.
hmm. So, speaking of which, so Florida is expensive. Now, there's no income tax, and I feel like there hasn't been an income tax like ever, has there?
No, never.
Right. And then DeSantis is in the process of abolishing property taxes. And then there is a sales tax. From my research, it says the sales tax is 6%. Counties may levy an additional 0.5% to 2%
Yep.
tax on sales. But do you think this is deceiving? Like,
Oh,
look, there's
100%.
right.
One hundred percent. So, Florida is a touristic state, right? So, from a business standpoint, they're very pro business, right? Because a lot of their revenue comes from tourists, right? And so businesses need to open up hotels, restaurants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Um, and so it makes sense to not have any sort of state tax because it just helps that, right? But because it's also very pro business, their living wages are ridiculously low, ridiculously low. Um, and people don't also consider the fact that, yeah, sales tax is much higher than most other states. I didn't even know that was an option until I left Florida. Like I always thought you always have to pay sales tax on everything. And then I moved to Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and I'm like, wait, what do you mean I'm gonna pay sales tax on like liquor or clothes or what I mean? Like what is happening here, right? So sales tax, yeah, 6%, but then depending on the county, it goes up to like 8%. I've seen in some situations where some counties even tax on food, for example. Um, and so the sales tax can go up to like 10% in some counties, right? If you're purchasing food items in a supermarket. You also have land, right? When you buy a house in Florida, right? The taxes on your houses are significantly higher than most other states. It's to make up for that lack of state tax. On top of that, right, is I always tell people this way, right? I remember when I first moved, when I tell people I lived in New York City, for example, right? One of the most expensive cities in the world, right? Um, but I had a livable wage. Like, I was getting paid $80,000, right? Um, Still very expensive, my rent, right? I was paying like $2,000 for a studio apartment. Uh, but the gap between living wage and the cost of living was very small in New York. In Florida, yeah, you're not paying any state taxes. But the one thing I tell people all the time when I'm in hospitality, so people move around all the time, for hotels and all that. And so when people go, oh, I want to go to Florida, I tell them, hold on, before you go down to places like Miami or Tampa, which are the most expensive cities in Florida, right? You have to consider the fact that there's no public transportation. Well, let me rephrase that. There is, but it's terrible. And it's only really buses. There's no trains, there's no subways, there's nothing. And so now you're in a state that's built on cars, right? Like you can't go anywhere in Florida without a car. And so now you're going from a city like Boston, right? Or New York, and now you have to buy a car. So now you have a car note, then you have insurance, then you have tolls, then you have gas, right? Like you combine all these things together with your lower income in your job. All right, the same job that I'm making, I was making in Boston, I was making $130,000 a year, would have paid me 90 in Florida. You know, and so not only are you paying less, your rent is also the same. I'll tell you right now, the rent is the same as Boston. You go down to Miami, literally the same cost of living if you're renting a place. Okay. God forbid you try to buy a house in Miami. That's forget it. You're not going to do that, right? And so you're paying the same rent you would in Boston, but you're getting paid less, and you now have to buy a car. So I think it's when people say it's affordable, or I think I call it total BS on it.
Right. I mean, it's affordable if you're a celebrity.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, it's the worst state to get pregnant in because like the healthcare there is terrible.
Right. There was a right wing state legislature actually who actually needed abortion services, and she said, like, the services down here are like terrible, and everyone's like, well, you've been pushing for this, like this is what it's like now because of what you've been pushing for,
I'm
like,
not even talking about abortion, right? I'm talking about just like getting pregnant here and wanting to have the baby, right? And there's no maternity leave in Florida, right?
wow.
Unlike in Massachusetts, there's no paid maternity leave. There's nothing here to protect the mothers while they go out on some leave. So you have poor parents here only getting like 4 weeks with their kids before they have to go back into work, right? And because Florida's so pro business, many businesses here aren't even incentivized to give maternity leave to their employees. So again, if you want to have a kid, right, lowest, I want to say lowest in hospital and how's that in hospitals, right? Cost of living is significantly higher. You get no time off with your newborn child, and that's not even counting for abortions and things like that.
Yeah, let's talk about public education in Florida. The Alligator Alcatraz, which it cost a lot of money, the state a lot of money. So not only, are they not spending any money on healthcare services or to build transportation, there's
Yep.
spending it on Alligator Alcatraz. We're going to talk a lot more about this later, but did you see a judge ordered it shut down and they're actually complying? Like they're setting up facilities elsewhere in the state, but Alligator Alcatraz is shutting down because the Native American tribes down there sued, and
Yep.
they won. They said that Alligator Alcatraz violated environmental laws. So that right
Yep.
there, that shows you how the Native Americans are still coming through in the clutch, and they always
Still,
will come through in the clutch. Now,
absolutely.
as a history teacher, I've written about how we don't. teach our at least our public school students, we don't teach enough about indigenous American accomplishments enough.
Right.
And so I've made it a priority when I taught U.S. History 1, like the first 2 months were all about the Native Americans, the North American indigenous tribes that were here before the Europeans arrived. I've
Yeah.
also taught a lot about how, like, like how the Native Americans interacted with European settlers. So public education, when you learned about history in Florida public schools, how much of it did you learn? How much was dedicated toward learning about the Seminole tribes and the other tribes that are native in Florida?
So I want to emphasize that I grew up in South Florida, which is very different than Central Florida, which is very different than Northern Florida, right? And so South Florida, specifically kind of the East Coast, Miami area, is a whole different country, right? It's mostly Spanish speaking is the first language in there, not English, right? Northern Florida is considered an extension of Alabama and Georgia, right? So it's very different. So me personally, I grew up learning a lot about primarily the Miccosukee tribe and the Seminole tribe, right? Those are kind of the primary tribes in Native American tribes in Florida. Mostly because they own a lot of our major casinos down there. So, but there's actually, we used to go on road trips to the Everglades, not like, like field trips to the Everglades. And they used to have Native American like villages still set in place for those to like visit and see what a Native American village would look like. Kids can play in like teepees and you can buy all sorts of gifts and everything like that that were like handmade by Native Americans, right? So it was always so cool to see that and on like little field trips and things like that. So again, I would say that my education was a lot better in a way than those in probably the central or even northern part of Florida. Just because I had direct access to that. I was 20-minute drive from, this Native American village, right? I was 20 minutes from Miccosukee Casino, right? And they were always very, very proud of their heritage, right? And so even though you see this massive casino, you'll still see on the side like um, a lot of museums and a lot of things, going back to their heritage. So I was lucky enough to be in a part of Florida where I learned a lot and how much impactful they were in just the state alone. Um, and even my school, my elementary school, um, was named. Her name was Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, which is not really a Native American, but she was known to be a big influence in making sure the Everglades were protected. And she worked very closely with Native American tribes to make that happen. So, um, South Florida is completely different when it comes to learning the history of it than the rest of Florida, for sure.
But you went to Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School?
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Elementary School.
Oh, so because now though the there's the Florida book bans.
Ah, yes.
40% of our nation's book bans have happened in Florida. There are 1,406 book ban cases in Florida, 33 school districts with book bans, and three. This is according to a group called PEN, which is like a monitors like book bans and education. It monitors education censorship. But there's also, according to the Florida Department of Education, 386 books have been removed from Florida schools. Now, you know, DeSantis at the end of 2023, when he had a Fox News debate with Gavin Newsom, DeSantis was claiming, these books were like, books that had like nudity in them and stuff, and like that's why they were being removed. But no, there's no way there were 300. There's no way there's been 386 books with nudity
With
prior to
nudity,
these
yeah.
book bans. I mean, some of them are being removed just because there's an LGBT character. I mean, one
Yep.
district even removed the Diary of Anne Frank,
Yep.
and
Exactly.
I mean, it's really
It's total bullshit.
exactly. And uh, DeSantis, not only did he end vaccine mandates for public schools, not just the COVID vaccine. I mean,
No, yeah, no,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah, and his kids go to a private school, and his the private school they go to, they require all of their students to have all of the vaccines. So it's like it's pretty hypocritical right
I
there.
mean, it's a political stunt. That's what. Not to go off topic, but Ron DeSantis for me is such a bullshitter in the best term possible when it comes to politics. He just likes to pull political stunts so he can look good in front of his constituents, which unfortunately Florida has made majority of now, right? Even when he was shipping immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, right? That was all just a political stunt. Like he's full of shit in so many ways. But he, again, in the public's eye, he is one of those guys that like he says what he says and then he does what he says, and that gives him a lot of points in politics, unfortunately.
Right. And so you're saying he's peddling to like the far right, like the MAGA base, because he wants to run for president in 2028.
Yes, absolutely. I'm
And
surprised. Well, I'm not surprised because Trump ran because I knew he was going to run for president, last year. I was just surprised how much he got destroyed by Trump. You
yeah,
know?
Trump actually attacked DeSantis. He called him Ron DeSales tax and ran
Yeah.
ads against him.
Yep. And so I was shocked to see how much he got destroyed because I personally I thought Trump still had like kind of bad rep behind him with the way he handled COVID. And I thought Ron DeSantis, I didn't want to say he had a better chance than Trump, but I didn't think it was going to be that big of a gap in terms of people who they wanted.
Yeah, another really horrible thing going on with Florida public schools right now is they're ending certificates for people with students with disabilities. Like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, that's just mean. I mean, it's terrible. It's like, and it does. I remember in 2010 when Charlie Crist had gone from a Republican to an independent, the legislature passed a bill that was, uh, parents and teachers of students with disabilities said this is going to be very harmful, and Crist vetoed it. But it's like that right there is just like that. The fact that DeSantis is presiding over this, like that should disqualify him for completely just this action alone.
I mean, again, going back, it's the worst state. If you have any sort of medical issues or disability, it's the worst state to be in, like by far. You know, I mean, I want to say that without doing any sort of research of other states, but like if you want to, right, if you have to choose between living in Nebraska versus Florida, of course, most people are going to say Florida. But I want to say their laws are just Florida laws in terms of disabilities are just as ancient as like some right-leaned, Midwestern state. It's crazy.
Right. But do you think it's going to reach a point where it just becomes way too much? Like the there's a declining enrollment in public schools in Florida. And I also saw a statistic that said 1 out of 3 college professors is currently looking to relocate to a different state. I mean, if you lose 1/3 of college professors,
So Florida always had an issue with education. My mom was a teacher, so I grew up around that situation, and my mom was a teacher, and she was getting paid like $60,000 a year, right? And which is not a lot of money in Miami. And she dealt with mostly disability students, right? Um, Typically, teachers that deal with students with disabilities get paid higher because it's a lot harder work, really, right? So I can only imagine what normal teachers would have made during her time as a teacher. Now she's retired. But even then, I remember her complaining at home about funds being cut for her class for full of kids with disabilities. Um, and so from the far back as I remember, Florida's always had an issue with education. Um, so of course it's only going to get worse, right? Like it's it's incredible to see the downturn or the vendetta against education in this country in general, right? Especially with this administration going after universities, right? So absolutely, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and when it comes to higher education, in 2014, the Florida State Legislature with your who's the lieutenant governor under DeSantis? She left. There's a new lieutenant governor.
The new lieutenant governor,
Yeah, the one there was a lieutenant governor in Florida who was, I believe
right
she was,
now the current one is Jay Collins,
so the woman before him, Jeanette Nunez.
Jeanette Nunez.
Yeah, she pushed a bill in through the Florida State Legislature in 2014 that set up a state version of the Dream Act for Florida, and Rick Scott signed it into law.
Yep,
And
remember that.
yeah, but the reaction is Florida State Legislature in 2025 just repealed that, and DeSantis signed it into law. It's Florida.
It's a I'm sorry, it's a political stunt. It's this whole anti-immigration, right? The Dream Act. Funny enough, my sister was got scholarships based on the Dream Act. So it's. I'm sorry, it just pisses me off.
Yeah, it's really awful too, and it's this used to be a bipartisan agreement that the Dream Act was a great idea. I mean, there's a lot of other states and then some red states too, like Utah and Nebraska.
It only helps our country, right? You get
Right.
these individuals from countries that don't have as good education, but you get them that are intelligent. They strive to do more, and they come to this country again. What the country was fundamentally built on, what was to have the American dream. And my sister, again, being under the Dream Act, she was born here, but my parents are immigrants, so she qualified under the Dream Act. Which is weird because again, she was born here. She was a naturalized citizen. Um, and I met so many people with her under the Dream Act, and they're all strive to be, anywhere from STEM researchers to wanting to go into cancer research, who, these so way more intelligent individuals than I am, wanting to just do better for themselves and for the country that gave them the opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, it's wrongfully attacking hardworking people, and it's going to create a brain drain. Like right now, I was reading articles of people, students in Florida who qualified under the Dream Act that no longer qualify, and they're not going to class because they're afraid of ICE. They're doing their coursework through online universities.
Yep.
So it's really courageous for them to find ways to adjust to very difficult times, but it's also it just goes to show like really we're wrongfully harming these people, and the state of Florida and really the Trump administration in general is just like shooting America in the foot.
Oh, 100%. But yeah, it's to enrich their own pockets, right? So DeSantis is one of those that he may not be enriching his own pockets, but he is doing it in a way that will make himself look good for his constituents so he can then be president in the future. That's it.
Yeah, and so another thing about Miami is I read that originally under the Biden administration they were going to give federal funding for like a an under an overpass, like a new park for people to
Yeah, that's no
walk
longer
through,
a
and
thing.
that got canceled. So do you feel like people in Miami are starting to regret voting for Trump and being on the MAGA bandwagon? Because another thing is, if you look at Alligator Alcatraz, there are people in there, there are legal immigrants, and there are people that are screaming, I'm a citizen. Like, so, and it just goes to show you that when you try to launch a crackdown like this, like, yes, your intent, I think we all agree that anyone connected to the cartel should be arrested and deported, but you're casting a big net and you're sweeping
Exactly.
up people that have nothing to do with cartels.
Especially now, right, with the Supreme Court ruling that ICE can pretty much forget the Fourth Amendment altogether. Miami's is, huge popular. Again, Spanish being the first language, so it's a huge population of people that don't look like you but look like me, right? So, to answer your question, are they regretting it? Yes, but not enough of them are regretting it. And I was just talking to my parents about this because my dad was a huge Trumper, right? Like he voted for him in 2016. He voted for him again in 2020. This time around, he didn't vote for him, right? So he's like learned his lesson. It took a lot of debating and arguing with him for my part, but he learned his lesson, and I think he opened his eyes a little bit. Or he went woke, I guess. Um, but it was you still see it. You still see, especially within the Cuban community, and like I said, yeah, there has been some that I'm like, man, I didn't vote for this, and I'm like, but yes, you did. Like he wasn't lying. Like you know what I mean? Like it's not like the first time he ran where he just bullshitted everything. No, he was very honest what he was gonna do. Um, so you see that definitely in the Hispanic community down in Miami, but not enough of it. Not enough of it. Especially again, post pandemic, there's a lot more individuals from other states that move down to Miami that are very right wing, and so you see a lot more Americans down in Miami than I am used to seeing when I was growing up. So you still see a lot of pickup trucks with Trump flags and people wearing red hats to Target and so yeah, to answer your question, there is regret, but not enough of it.
Right. And let's talk about Florida's getting a reputation, or at least DeSantis is trying to create a reputation that law enforcement is cracking down on crime in Florida and like cities are safe. Like there's like that's what DeSantis criticized Newsom on in the debate that they had. And I have like read that like, Miami, for example, is like safer than it used to be, but it should be noted because I've worked with kids like in the metro region, and my big push is to make our cities as safe as the suburbs. Like my it's always been a
Good.
goal of mine to some of the major cities to go a year without having a homicide.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it's a very ambitious goal, but
No.
I know that Newsom actually pointed out that some of the Florida cities actually had higher homicide rates than cities such as Chicago or Baltimore. Like Chicago, Baltimore, DC, like it's still a work in progress, but the police there, no federal authorities, but city police have really been working with, and it's called community policing. Like they're connecting with their community and they're working with their community to reduce violent crime. And this means that, they're also cutting down on the number of arrests. Like they're not basically, tackling someone just because they jaywalked. Like they're not over policing.
Yeah.
That's not a serious problem. And it's what they're doing is another success stories are in Camden and in Newark. Like I know back in 2012, 2013, they fired the entire police departments there because there was a lot of corruption and racial profiling, and it was shown that it wasn't stopping the gangs. But they've restarted things there, and there's still an issue with crime, but it's proving that when police have a community policing attitude, when we're not soft on crime, not tough on crime, but smart on crime, like that's really what's reducing homicides and violent crime. But in Miami, do you think there's have you seen or experienced racial profiling from law enforcement?
So Florida's always been kind of in the middle of the road when it came to like crimes, right? As a state in general. And then in Miami, like any city has its bad areas, right? I think it has gone down significantly less. There's definitely less crime, but I have to, there's two factors into that. One is the fact that because Miami is so diverse, right? The police officers there are also diverse. So there's very less social profiling, right? When you have police officers, the majority of them that look like Hispanics or look black, there's going to be less social profiling. So that's definitely one factor to it. Another factor is the gentrification, right? Like it's crazy how much Miami's been invested in, and with that investment comes safety, right? Investment in law enforcement, investment in. I'll tell you this much. I went down there. I go down there like two or three times a year, right? Visit family and things like and friends and all that. In the last few years, I've noticed police officers drive much nicer vehicles than in the past. Okay. I've seen them really invest heavily on Dodge Chargers, on really these hard muscle vehicles. And what I've seen also is an increase in undercover. Again, I think it's really all these investors that invest in Miami are pushing for obviously more safety, right? Because most of their business comes from tourists. So Miami's for me has always been safe, right? As long as you look out for yourself, like any city, right? Like, as long as you look out for yourself, you don't go down the wrong road. You're not flashing your jewelry or whatever too much, right? Miami's always been safe for me. And it's definitely gotten better. But again, those two factors is less gentrification because of the more diverse police force and more investment coming from real estate moguls.
Definitely. What's your take on gun control in America? Because it's very interesting. And after the Parkland tragedy in 2018,
Yeah.
Florida state legislature passed gun control measures for the first time since the 1980s. I mean, as we both know, Florida has always been a very pro-gun state.
Hmm.
But Rick Scott signed these into law too. He said it raised the age to buy a firearm from 18 to 21, which, some people are all like, oh, that's not enough. Well, having worked with youth, I have to say the prefrontal cortex is not fully in the brain is not fully developed until 25. Like, a kid at 21 could be much more um, you know, reasonable and make much better decisions than someone who's 18. And that kid Nick Cruz, he was only 19. If and he legally purchased those guns because he was of age. Like if under this law he would have been prevented from purchasing those guns, and maybe some you know he could have gotten the help that he needed, and that tragedy could have been prevented. I'd also, but another two key pillars is it banned bump stocks, which turn bump stocks basically turn assault rifles into automatic weapons. That's one of the very few things the Trump administration got right. Trump signed an executive order in his first term banning bump stocks, but then Congress and I mean no, the Supreme Court wrongfully ruled 6-3 that this ban is no longer in effect at the federal level because it had to be passed by Congress first. But at least in Florida, they passed a law banning bump stocks. They've also enacted red flag laws. And David Hogg, one of the survivors of the Parkland tragedy, who's turned his traumatic experience into activism, he told a story about how his mom had an ex-boyfriend who was threatening violence against her. But under Florida's red flag laws, law enforcement was able to take away
Yeah.
guns from this guy while he was thinking about committing, a violent act with the guns. And so I think red flag laws uh, are necessity or a necessity for safety, and they don't infringe upon the Second Amendment. It's like, the First Amendment is a key part of our Constitution, but if you smear someone, you're and you can be sued for libel or slander. I mean, you also can't, go on a bus and shout bomb because that speech threatens others. So I feel like, with the Second Amendment, like, yes, there's a right for the militia to bear arms, but it's it's reasonable to say that someone who has been convicted of a crime or is accused of committing a crime, they need to have their guns taken away at least for a period of time, don't you think?
Yes. So it's funny you say that. I recently got into collecting firearms as of 6 months ago. So as of today, I own five firearms: two handguns, one shotgun, two rifles. So I've gotten into I've always been to firearms. I like the Second Amendment. I like what it stands for against a tyrannic government. I will never go against the Second Amendment. However, I think gun laws are too easy, right? And I myself have experienced that in the last 6 months, how easy it is. I'll tell you how easy it is, okay? I got into it. I never wanted to own a firearm because I was always traveling. I was always like, moving and things like that. So I'm like, I don't know if, different state laws, and I don't want to keep track of all these state laws. So I went back to Florida 6 months ago, was hanging out with a friend, loved guns. He had a collection of handguns. And he was like, "Look, I'm trying to sell these. I'll sell you these two for $1,000." I'm like, $500 a piece. I'm like, "Yeah, that's a steal." I said, I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Why not? Right? All right, sell it to me. Okay. All he had to do was print out a form online. All he had to do was put the serial number, sign, had me sign it, and that's it. The firearms were mine. And I remember going, wait, don't you have to like upload that into like a database, or like do they have to like run a background check on me, or like what? And he goes, no, it's if it, again, Florida allows third party to just sell guns as long as you don't know the other person's a felon, right? Um, and I'm like, well, how would they know? Like, let's just say, what's stopping me from like buying a gun, shooting someone with it, right? And then discarding it, and then they find it and they come to me as the owner, and I'm like, nope, I have this piece of paper that says that I sold it, right?
Right.
And my friend was like, nothing, absolutely nothing is stopping you from doing that. And that's when I realized, I'm like, oh my God, this is way too easy here in Florida. Then then it was even more an eye-opening when I'm like, oh crap, how am I gonna ship these guns back home? Like so first I went to UPS, and UPS was like, well, we can't really ship it if we know it's a firearm. I'm like, okay. Then I was like, wait, can I just put these guns on an airplane? And I reached out to American Airlines, and they're like, yeah, if it's a checked bag and you lock it up and it's in a hard case, yeah, you can just ship. And I was like, no way. And that's exactly what I did. I put it in a hard case. I went to the special services line at the airport, at Miami International Airport. They checked the guns to make sure they had no ammunition, and then they just said, "You're good to go." And that's it. Like I came back, I picked up my guns right here from DCA, showed my ID, they gave me my guns. Then from then on, I keep going back to Florida, buy weapons in Florida and bring them back with me because it's much easier than to buy them where I'm at now. and
Right.
so and so it's one of those situations. It was interesting to kind of get involved in that. Um, because Florida absolutely has taken so much step forwards, right? Not just the stocks, but also things called like binary triggers. Binary triggers is a form of way to make the gun legally automatic, okay? Because technically the gun is not automatic, even though it shoots automatic. And Florida banned them, which was a shocker to me. I'm like, what, out of all states, really, Florida bans them? So they do take good steps forward. It's just other parts where they maybe should be a little bit more strict, right? Things like the gun show law, right? In
Yep.
Florida, where you can just go to any gun show, no background check needed, no nothing. Bam, bam, exchange, sign the paper, you're good to go. You can literally walk out of there with a firearm with an ammo within 30 minutes of being there, right?
Yeah, and that's another argument that I say to people why you wonder why the cartels have so many weapons. You wonder why gangs in Chicago have so many guns when in Chicago they have very strict gun laws. It's like, well, the gangs of Chicago, what they do is they go to Indiana, where in Indiana you can walk into a gun show and, like you said, it's another place in the country where you can get guns and ammunition in like 30 minutes without any kind of background check. So what the gangs of Chicago are doing is they're going to Indiana, buying all these guns, then bringing them back to Chicago and selling them on the street. So that's why Chicago has had such a serious problem with gun homicides. It's not the fact that the city has a strict gun law. It's the fact that Indiana's laws are way too loose. And if you look at the cartels, like 90% back in 2009, there was a study that said 90% of their firearms were coming from the United States. That's been cut down to about 70%. Like I went to a briefing when I was an intern on DC with the Border Patrol long before the Trump administration came along. So, and the Border Patrol said that they had southbound checks and that they were making progress stopping guns going south. But the cartels, like in Mexico, there's like one gun manufacturing site, legal gun manufacturing site in the whole nation. What the cartels are doing is they're finding people in the United States to make straw purchases. Like they say, here's the money to go purchase an assault rifle, and then here's our money to you for doing this action for us. And then people are buying them weapons, and they're smuggling the assault rifles back down to Mexico, which they've used to wreak havoc. So it's really, and I attended another briefing down there about gun safety and reducing gun homicides, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. And at the time, they said the gun market, with all their advertisements and all their loose ways to purchase firearms, the cartels were very attracted to that. And
Yeah.
so like it goes to show you, like I've also heard an argument that says like heroin and methamphetamine are illegal, yet they're still rampantly used. It would, once again, like if you make a drug illegal, like it just goes to the black market. Like I think that that's the case with drugs because drugs can be man-made. Like they say, oh, the same thing would happen with guns if we pass gun control. Well, I think if you show what how the gangs get their guns and how the cartels get their guns, guns are trafficked very differently. And
Well, and I think look, the point of stricter gun laws is not to get rid of violence, right? That's never going to happen. Let's just get that out of the way. In this country, gun culture is too ingrained that we will never get rid of guns, one, and two, never get rid of gun violence. That will never happen. However, can we decrease it by just making it harder for criminals to get guns? And the argument on the other side would say, "Oh, you're just making it harder for the good guy with a gun to get a gun." And I'm like, I'm just making it harder for anyone to get a gun. I don't care if it's a good guy or a bad guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't be that easy. In the last 6 months, for me to own literally five firearms, you know, just by flying to Florida and coming back with them. It just shouldn't be that easy.
right. And like I've read somewhere that there's actually more like guns in America than people. Like it's, I
I
mean,
mean, I'm one person. I own five. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. I mean, Stephen Colbert a long time ago said like, New Jersey proposed a one gun a month like rule. And then Stephen Colbert was like, what? I can only purchase 12 guns a year.
like seriously, my friend owns. Well, now he owns only 12, but before that, he owned like 20. And I'm like, and they were only handguns. So anything that we do will improve, right? Whether that be limiting the number of guns you can buy to limit it, like making more thorough background checks to, I don't know. The fact that I can walk into a gun store, buy a brand new gun, and it literally takes them 20 minutes to run a background check on me. I bought guns on the internet. Okay. All I do is literally purchase them on the internet, select a gun store to pick them up from in Florida. Okay. I fly to Florida to visit my family. I go to the gun store. I show them my ID. They run a background check that literally takes 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. It's crazy to me. Me working in HR, I run background checks for employees, upcoming, and it takes me 3 days to get a background check back. Okay, 3 days to just to hire someone. The fact that it's harder for me to get a background check to hire someone to do a job than it is to purchase a firearm is crazy to me.
Right. And actually, breaking news. Have you heard Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck in Utah?
What?
Yeah. Talk about, a gun rights advocate or an ammo sexual. Now he's a victim of ammo
Oh man, but
sexuals.
you know what? This was at a university, so now it's even. Oh God, they're gonna twist this to say, that the universities are brainwashing our kids, like fired from a building 200 yards away. That's not an easy shot. Wasn't a-
Wow.
And I don't like Charlie Kirk as much as the next guy, but no one deserves to get shot. That's for sure.
No, and you know what I used to say to people, like when I've gone out canvassing, like if people disagreed with the candidate who I was promoting, what I said to them is, well, at the end of the day, we're all Americans, and the great thing about being an American is that we have the right to think what we want, have these open discussions, and vote for who we want to, and I mean also vote and like the five First Amendment freedoms: press, speech, religion, assembly, and petition. I said, like, these are rights that in some places in the many places in the world, people don't have, but here in America, we naturally possess them. And then the people have been like, absolutely. I mean, my mom teaches English as a second language, and she said, in Jordan, if you oppose the king, like her students have told her that in Jordan, if you say something negative about the king, you disappear. And like in Syria, like in 2012, there were students. I was 22, about to be 23 during the 2012 election, and I was following what was going on in Syria when people were fighting against the unelected Bashar al-Assad, and I read about people my age who were going out there and fighting, and they were killed, and they were fighting just to be able to have uh, rights that we as Americans naturally possess. So whoever shot Charlie Kirk, like, you're not really doing the uh, the the image of the U.S. as being a constitutional republic and being a democracy where we have all these freedoms. Like, you're not doing that reputation any good by going and shooting someone you disagree with.
Yeah, and I'm from Cuba, so it's one of those things that absolutely, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, those are all just ingrained in what should be the American culture, right? Uh, to go a little off topic a little bit at the same time, we're not the only country that has those, right? So I also want to say, when you hear things like, oh, we're the greatest country in the world because of that, I'm like, well, there's other countries that have those too, right? And the only difference is they don't have as much gun violence. So,
Which brings me to capital punishment. I had a professor in college. I had him for history of Latin America. He defended Fidel Castro, and part of his defense of Fidel Castro, he said that George W. Bush, when he was governor of Texas, signed more death warrants than people that Castro killed. Now, I don't know if that's, I mean, it sounds like, when for when the Castro killed people, like it sounds like I truly believe though that like there were some people killed in Cuba who um died. Like Castro didn't directly confirm like this was my action, but like he led to it happening. So that I think that my professor's point could be disputed. But what does Cuba? Does Cuba have capital punishment?
To be honest, I don't know. I haven't been keeping up with Cuban politics since Fidel Castro died, so or at least his brother died, Raul Castro. So I don't know about capital punishment. For me, capital punishment personally is a sensitive topic. I believe in, having a fair trial. I believe in having, innocent until proven guilty. What I don't believe is life sentence. Because taxpayer dollars are going to, this guy who killed, as an example, someone who killed six people in cold blood, and there's clear and cut evidence on that, and getting life in prison. It's like let the what just like like the I don't know. For me, it's capital punishment is okay if used sparingly and used correctly.
Yeah. I mean, according to AI, so I just looked this up. It says Cuba has a de facto moratorium on capital punishment, meaning the death penalty has not been carried out since 2003 and death row has been empty since 2010. So while the death penalty is still legal and authorized for various crimes, including those related to state security, piracy, drug trafficking, and murder, the government has not formally abolished it. And then the usual method of execution is a firing squad. So it hasn't been used since '03, and there hasn't been any Cubans on death row in Cuba since 2010, but it's still there. But that seems more humane compared to what DeSantis has done in Florida. With did you see how he's really expedited death
Yep.
sentences? And I know you mentioned we just heard your take on capital punishment. I think that I'm generally against capital punishment. I feel like, the reason being is that like it's in places like Texas and in Florida, Oklahoma, there are people who had a very difficult childhood, difficult home life, were living on the streets,
That's fair.
and they, were under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and they, end up shooting someone. Like that's very tragic, and like we
Yeah.
should do everything we can to prevent that from happening. But there are people who have done that and then been sentenced to life without parole. There's also been people who have been given the death penalty for something like that. But while behind bars, they've really found their purpose. They've seen the error of their ways, and they've, done everything they can to help other inmates, change their ways. And they also lead um, you know, discussions where like, high school students, college students like come in to like the visitor center, and they have like a discussion about like how they ended up in prison, and like they have a lot of messages to you know tell people their stories, but also to like try to use their stories to tell people not to make the same mistake that they made.
I'm all about second chances, right? And I think prisoner reform, right, and prisons in general in this country, I'm not to get too details of that, should have some kind of change to give felons and somebody just getting out of prison a better opportunity after they get out. Um, but when it comes for me personally, when it comes to capital punishment, it should be more stricter. Like Ron DeSantis passed a law that's child sex offenders are going to be like that's too extreme, right? Like, yes, I'm not saying that's not a good crime or anything, but you're right. There is an opportunity for people to see, they had a troubled childhood. Maybe they were sexually assaulted as a kid, and there's a way for them through therapy, through sessions, can be reformed. Absolutely. But then on the other hand, right, I'm talking about like growing up in Miami, the Thai Miami Trail Strangler, right? Like back in the 90s, there's a guy who killed six women in Miami. And he admitted to it. And he was like, absolutely. And then he was sentenced to was it like 5 life prison terms? I'm like, why do you need five? You know what I mean? Like one for each woman. Okay, great. Just kill the guy. You know what I mean? Like that's personally my opinion. Like, doesn't have to be right away after he's found guilty. No, right? It could be, 20, 30 years, right? Like I think the guy was only in his like 30s or 40s, right? So could it be 20 years, 30 years, and then if you see an actual change in his behavior and things like that, then there's a way to kind of get him out of death row. Sure, I'm all for second chances, but I'm not a big fan of keeping people in prison for 50 plus years, just so they can die of natural causes in prison.
Right. What do you think about Nick Cruz, the Parkland shooter? Charlie Crist and Nikki Fried, the two Democratic candidates for governor in 2022, like they ran on a very as liberals, but even they thought that Cruz should be executed. However, he was spared. I Do you think that was the right decision to spare Nick Cruz? Nick Cruz, like give him a life without parole rather than the death penalty?
That's a great question.
Tough call.
Yeah, well, I mean, he killed like 17 kids, right?
Right.
Like they weren't even adults, they were kids. And so I would have not, because I think, and he did it at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. That makes sense why you asked me that. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's right. I went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Elementary School. Um, Personally, I think he should have probably gone in the Capitol, just because they're children. There's no reason you can have all the mental health issues in the world, right? Um, Personally, before we get to that level, I'll say this: I'm a big believer in investing more into mental health, right? Before we get to capital punishment, I think we should focus more on mental health solutions, right? So for me, that's a bigger priority than the capital punishment. Um, Once we invest in that sort of resources, and then you still have an individual that goes and kills 17 kids, um, then we can start talking about is it worth it or not. But on paper, right? On paper, from the knowledge that I know from that incident, yes, I do believe yes. Yeah. And how old was Nicholas Cruz? He was young.
He
He
was
was
only
like
19. That's why
like
I don't think like it's been ruled that like I know in Massachusetts, anyone who commits a murder under the age of 21, they can't even get life without parole. There has to be parole given at some point. But
yeah, I
that
can
I
agree to
and
that.
yeah, but I
I
think
can
with
agree to
the
that.
Nick Cruz's case, and it's similar to that Idaho murderer who killed four people in college, like another awful thing that happened. But one argument I would say is if we are going to spare these people with life without parole, it would enable us to, for psychiatrists to sit down with the Idaho murderer, Nick Cruz, and like really do a full autopsy on how they got to be like where they got to be and like brain scans and everything so that we can learn how to detect someone who could be following in their footsteps and then prevent that someone who's following in their footsteps from committing an atrocity.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that people on the right, are huge on capital punishment and these types of punishments, but don't invest in mental health is crazy to me because and you know what, I can be swayed to say, you know what, this kid is 19 years old, is way too young for capital punishment. You know what I mean? Like mistakes can happen, and I'm not saying killing 17 kids is just any mistake. It's not like, oh, I misspelled a word,
Or
um but I do believe I'm a big believer in second chances, and so yeah, I do think that at 19 years old, I think there's a way for him to reform and come back. But if you're a 40, 50-year old and you do the same thing, that you're gonna have a hard time swaying me there for sure.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely where I think a lot of people feel should be the case. Like the capital punishment can be available for like the worst possible crimes, but it's still used too often. But like in Florida, for example, DeSantis also signed a bill into law saying that if 8 out of 12 jurors convict someone, then that person can be executed. But the Florida Supreme Court just struck that down.
Oh,
So
I didn't know that part. Okay.
yeah, and there's some of the people that DeSantis has worked to execute. You know, once again, they weren't serial murderers. They like, they murdered someone, but they had, severe disabilities. Like there was questionable whether or not they actually um, were the ones who did the murder. I mean, there's been people who have been exonerated just, minutes away from lethal injection. So really like, and another thing though, I discovered this in my own research in 2009. The capital punishment does not deter violent crime. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember at the time, statistics only tell some of the story, but like I remember, you know, states that had abolished the death penalty had a significantly lower homicide rate compared to states that actively use the death penalty. I mean, like in Texas, for example, they've had a lot of homicides over the year, and they have a high use of the death penalty. And um, Florida, also from my research, is actually got a very um, it's got a higher homicide rate compared to the rest of the. Oh, okay. Here's my data. So, according to the FBI, in Florida in 2024, 267 violent crimes per 100,000 residents. That is an 8.7% decrease compared to 2023, but the current rate is 25 points. So it's 25.6% lower than the national average, but there are still 1,420 property crimes per 100,000 people. Um, and then in California, violent crime rose slightly in 2023, went from 495 per 100,000 to 503 per 100,000 violent crime rate. So that includes murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault. But in 2023, under Newsom's leadership, homicides dropped 13.7% and rapes dropped 3%. Um, but I also took a look at the gun death rate in Florida, and it's actually in 2019, it was when DeSantis took office, it was 12.7 per 100,000. And that was a total of 2,872 gun deaths. This isn't counting gun suicides or accidental gun um, discharging. And then in 2021, it had gone from 12.7 in 2019 to 14.1 in 2021 per 100,000, and it had upped all the way up to 3,142 total gun deaths. And then in 2023, the rate went back down to 13.7, but the total deaths are 3,253 gun deaths in the state of Florida. So once again, DeSantis is talking about how he's cracking down on violent crime. Well, once again, and this isn't, it's not, solely in the governor's control to like, to, the homicide rate doesn't necessarily reflect every action taken by the governor. And, casualization doesn't equal causation, but it goes to show you that um, there's still a lot like, DeSantis really can't, criticize Chicago, Los Angeles, and Baltimore when he has a relatively high number of gun homicides in his home state.
I mean, yeah. Right. The more population you have, the higher risk of violence, especially on a state that's open with gun laws as Florida. I mean,
Right. So, what do you think we can do? What can Floridians do to, turn things around down there?
care about their people more? No, I mean, um, I'm always gonna have a soft spot for Florida since I grew up there. Um, is it a lost cause? No, it's not. Of course not. I believe it'll slowly be purple with as time goes on for sure. Um, what can they do right now to turn things around? Vote. I mean, yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to say because it's such a diverse group of people down in Florida, right? And most of them are crazy. Hence why we always have like a story of Florida man every other weekend. I feel like. That's a great question that I don't know the answer to.
Right.
I want to say the basic answer is like, invest in mental health, invest in taking care of not banning books, not banning vaccines. Like kind of basic questions, but I know that's not going to happen. So where else can they go? I don't know.
Right. And two more things I'd like to say that kind of give us some hope. Well, first off, Byron Donalds, he's an African American congressman from he represents Southwest Florida, which has always been conservative. Do you know Byron Donalds?
I'm not familiar with them. No.
Yeah, he's actually a strong Trumper. He first got elected in 2020. He's a strong Trumper. I disagree with him on everything, but
Okay.
trying to you know, go back towards the center and trying to find something that we can all find common ground on. Byron Donalds, back in the year 2000, when he was 21, he defrauded a bank.
Oh
And,
wow.
yeah, and was criminally charged. And when he's been interviewed about it since, he said I was in a bad time in my life, so I was, that's why I defrauded the bank. He paid back what he owed the bank and stuff. So he was once upon a time he was arrested and charged for defrauding a bank, but now though he's a congressman. So I feel like the people in his district, and this is a very conservative district. I feel like liberals would be more likely to forgive someone for what Byron Donalds did compared to conservatives, but like the fact is the people know that Donalds did this, but they acknowledge that he has, realized the error of his ways. He's changed his ways, and the fact that they've now voted him to represent them in D.C. for 3 straight elections show that the first thing that they think when they hear Byron Donalds, they think of him as their congressman, not this guy who at 21 years old defrauded a bank. So I think that I like to tell that story to people who have gotten in trouble, like people in our county jails, like, if you can realize the error of your ways, change your ways, and like, do good things, like what people will mainly remember you by is the good things you did, not the bad. And I think that like Byron Donalds kind of shows this.
I'm just reading on him. I didn't realize he announced his candidacy for governor next year. So that's interesting.
Yeah, he also said he actually came out against ending vaccine mandates. He said he's not sure Governor DeSantis would be able to do this. So it sounds like then again, the fact that we're even debating vaccine mandates is
Wild.
concerning. But yeah, at least so maybe Donalds isn't as extreme as DeSantis is. But so, which brings me to my last point. Talking about bringing good to the world, talking about increasing tolerance. Um, the adult film industry, which
Yeah.
has been big in Miami. Now, I want to discuss like this has long been taboo and it's can still be awkward to talk about, but in the past 15 years, I feel like Instagram has really normalized softcore porn, and OnlyFans has gotten to the point where it's not just women who are in the adult industry, but there's also like women who are reality stars who are setting up their OnlyFans. Like Iggy Azalea set up an OnlyFans. Like it's gone from being viewed as exploitation to female empowerment, and
Mhm.
it's interesting because Hugh Hefner, you know, it's been at first. It should be noted that it's come out that Hugh Hefner was actually kind of too controlling of like the playmates that lived in that house, and that's
Yeah.
unacceptable. But he still can be viewed upon as a civil rights hero because in 1961, when he opened up the Playboy Club, it was desegregated, and this was at a time when there was a lot of segregation still in Florida.
That's true. Yeah.
And he also Hefner also said, like, rather than read war magazines and be all about war, like, you should read my magazine Playboy, which is much more relaxing. And he also said, Hefner was a champion for female like bodily autonomy.
Mhm.
He was a champion for LGBTQ rights. He also was a strong advocate for, legalizing marijuana. He said, it's, your body, your choice if you want to use a mind altering substance. And he opened up a second club in Miami Beach in the 1970s. And then um, there's the Playboy's actually moving from its headquarters from Los Angeles to Miami. And it's, back in 2012, it was kind of viewed as like I feel like the adult industry was viewed as like a secret weapon for the left. And let's be honest, a lot of far right people are addicted to adult entertainment. Um,
Secretly, but yeah.
but it's like now though, like there's a lot of women and men in the adult entertainment that have actually like swung over to the right. And like I know there was a male, a very popular male performer who was very happy when DeSantis got reelected. And then there's
Right.
also like, there's a female creator from China who's, promoting Trump like on her Instagram. There is, another female creator that said, after Trump got reelected, she's like, my crypto just shot up, like thanks Trump and stuff. So it's kind of like the people in the adult industry are. It sounds like they're strongly support laissez-faire economics because they don't want to pay taxes on their lucrative business, and so that's why they're kind of like Trump and like DeSantis and MAGA are starting to win them over,
Yep.
and it's like another thing is I'm a big champion of tolerance, and I'm a big believer that everyone deserves to be respected. Another thing, a lot of female creators have come out about improving mental health services like in the industry, and I'm definitely 150% in favor of that and want to see that happen. But having grown up in Miami, has adult entertainment not always been taboo because Miami's kind of has this history. And then what do you make of you know the the increasing social acceptance of
Sure.
adult entertainment? Because I actually think that's a good thing. That it's much more both for the creators and for our society in general. And I also will, it's a whole nother conversation, but I don't think there's strong enough evidence that adult entertainment leads to sex related crimes.
I think the only evidence they have is that, adult entertainment leads to more, mental health issues
Yes.
than sex-related crimes for sure. Um, and growing up in Miami, yeah, it wasn't as taboo. I grew up literally with half-naked women being in my eyes since I arrived in Miami at 5 years old. And I thought it was normal. I thought it was legitimately normal until I left Miami for the first time and left to Orlando, only 4 hours north of Miami. That was my first time living outside of Miami. I was 21 years old and realized, oh wait, people are uncomfortable with girls wearing thong bikinis. Like people are uncomfortable with this. Like, what? I don't understand why. I don't understand why. Right. And so in Miami, even where the Miami Heat play, the arena. I forgot they changed their name like 2 years ago, and I don't know their new name. But when I grew up, they were called the American Airlines Arena. When they were rechanging the name, the adult company Bang Bros was even in the running.
I heard
So
about that.
it was like a normal thing. It was like oh, okay. So growing up in that environment, I've always been okay with people being part of the adult industry. I've never seen anything wrong with it. If you have a problem with the adult industry, don't blame the performers, blame the people that paying for it, right? Like,
Right.
if you have a
And don't
problem,
watch it. You don't have to
and
watch
don't
it.
watch it. Exactly. Like don't watch it. And then if like it don't I was just talking to a friend about it earlier today because there was an OnlyFans model who showed her earnings last year, and her earnings were like $30 million, and people were just like hating on her. And I'm like, don't hate on her, hate on the people consuming the stuff. You know what I mean? Don't punish her for that. Jesus, it's a business like anything else, right? And so I've always been on that side of things that, like, if you want to go into it, by all means, as long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, right? I've heard horror stories about, adult performers in the adult industry. I think OnlyFans has really lowered that risk down because now you can be your own producer, you can be your own director, you can be your own agent. You can promote yourself versus relying on others to do it for you. So I think that's been great. I think, it's interesting you say Playboy moved to Miami. I think Playboy has been irrelevant for many, many years now, but it made a lot of progress in making it less taboo, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of these performers who are now leaning towards the right, um, a lot of the right wing states are making it hard to access.
Yes. They're saying age verification laws
You
is
know,
actually having the reverse effect.
exactly. Like it's so interesting that they talk about not banning guns because they don't want it to go to the black market, but now they're doing the same thing with this other industry, and people are still watching it like nothing before, right? So the fact that a performer in the industry is going right wing, but the right wing is only making it harder for them to make money in a way, is interesting. But I think a lot of it has to do with taxes, of course, right? Especially that, again, most of them are not getting paid by a company anymore. Now they're their own business, right? Um, and a lot of it has to do with that. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I think and by we I mean the left leaned a little too much to the left, right? The extreme left, and it became almost like less tolerant of adult industries in the left, only because like you saw all these, extreme feminists pushing against, things like porn because of they saw it as less women empowerment, right? And so I think you're seeing a lot of that being swung the other way with a lot of the adult performers. But again, Miami has always been so interesting because I think the three largest cities with a big adult industry has always been LA, Las Vegas, and Miami. It's always been like that. And and so now you go to Miami and it's like literally the economy is run on OnlyFans models. Like I left and right, you're gonna, whether it's male or female, it doesn't matter. You're gonna bump into at least 10 of them on the street, you know?
Yeah. And, I've watched documentaries too of how, um, porn companies, which are, once again, OnlyFans is really eating into the revenue of the porn companies, but like porn companies are still making money, and like they're actually like there's actually a service where if you're not in the adult industry, you can actually rent your house out to the companies where they'll come shoot the video, and then that's a good way to make extra money. I mean, if
Well,
you're
it's a lot of
I'll pay for those expensive houses down in Miami.
yeah, exactly, right? You Airbnb them out. But there's also a lot of collaboration, right? Like, where are you going to expand? If you're going to opening up a business, where are you going to expand your business? Well, you're going to go where that business thrives, right? Like, that's where you're going to go, right? And you're going to connect and you're going to partner up with other people with the same mindset as you. right? It's the same with the adult industry, right? Now you're seeing all these OnlyFans models. Again, it started out during the pandemic, or at least it blew up during the pandemic, right?
Yep.
And people started moving to Miami because of cheap rent. And then they started realizing, oh my God, I'm not the only one with an OnlyFans here. And they started collaborating with each other and they started making business models and they started connecting with other creators. And now I feel like Miami is like the OnlyFans hub in the world, you know? So, uh, yeah,
It's also important because there's a lot of families, there's a lot of adult entertainment workers who have families, and like, there's stories, there's reports of like people on the internet, like trolls, like attacking their like children and stuff. Like that's not okay. And
absolutely not okay. I mean, you got to have a little bit of empathy, right? Like I look, I get it. They're doing something you don't like or that you feel very uncomfortable with. But again, you shouldn't attack them. You should attack the people consuming them. They just have a business like anyone else. And the amount of mental health concerns I have for children that have parents in the adult industry is another subject all completely, because you can only imagine like you grow up and then your friends are watching your own parents, like
yeah, and that's
naked. So
when
it's like
things are tough. Like I know, but like a lot of female models and stuff are like writing books and have written books. And like one of them said, like, if your first time, seeing someone have sex was one of my videos, then I'm sorry. Like, that's not like there just needs like, we need to have proper sex ed in schools first off. And then two,
100%.
like,
What
once
like
again, I think there just needs to be a lot more open discussions about this kind of stuff.
I mean, talking about going real quick back to education, right? I remember me growing up, we had health class, right? And health class wasn't even a full year; it was half a year. We used to we used to do health class for half the year and then switch it over to driver's ed the other half. Okay. And the same person taught the same class. Okay. So you had this, we used to call him Coach B, who was a football coach, tall African American guy, right? Like the deep voice and all that. He was a great driver's ed teacher. But the moment you switch over to health, he would literally stand in front of the class. Literally, I'll never forget this. He would stand in front of the class and read off the book about the female organ, female sex organ. So it's like, are you kidding me, dude? Like you don't even, like you're not an actual teacher about this. You're just reading off the same book we have in front of us. Um, so there definitely needs to be. I think conservatives have made it a little too taboo. I think sex in general should be talked about openly. I think it should be discussed amongst parents should discuss it with their kids. My biggest concern is just your friends, right? The people you're gonna hang out with when you go to school, seeing your parents having sex, and then they're making fun of you for it, or they're spreading it amongst. It's just like I have a friend of mine whose sister is an OnlyFans, and he gets picked on all the time, because it's like, oh, I saw your sister have sex, you know what I mean? Like, and like it causes him so much anxiety. So it's just from that standpoint, I think is a little concerning, but that's a choice they make, and that's the choices and the consequence of it, of being put yourself out there on the internet, right? At the end of
Right.
the day, yeah.
And I think they're like the adult community, whether you're a performer in it, whether you have a family in it, whether you're one of the cameramen, like they all need to work together to say, if someone, gives you shit for being in it, just say, you know what, like I'm comfortable with what I'm doing. I'm making a lot of money. Like, fuck off. Like your opinion
I
doesn't
mean, I
matter.
told I told my friend, I'm like, you can literally turn back to that guy and say, "Hey, all right, cool. Thanks for paying for my sister's own pants." I mean, like, it's like, all right, cool. Oh, my sister just bought me a great gift with the money you gave her. So, and you
There's
turn it
a
around on them.
Yeah, there was another adult entertainer who said like, she was picked on a lot in middle school, but like now those same boys who, picked on her for having, crooked teeth are now like paying to watch her videos. So it's like, but because another thing too is I've read a lot of Cuban stars have been outspoken about getting democracy established in Cuba. And there was a one Cuban star who was interviewed who said like she's taken a lot of her money she's earned, and like for example, she has sent it to to her, to not only to her family, but she used it to buy gloves for Cuban hospitals because she said like like we talked about this on our first episode together, like Cuba has socialized healthcare and it's cheap and it's at times can be effective, but like once again, that's since it's socialized, there can be less items at times. And like she told a story about how there was a hospital near where she grew up where doctors only had one set of gloves for an entire day, but she
Yeah.
used her money she earned and bought boxes of gloves for that hospital. So I actually think it's having, and like that's an example about how the the rise and the tolerance and the rightful increase of social acceptance of the adult industry is actually having a positive impact on our society.
That sounds awesome. I didn't know that story. That's great.
Yeah, but um, like I feel like it's interesting. I'm sure DeSantis is well aware uh, that of all this stuff going on down in Miami, but he wouldn't dare be
No.
try to like go
They're
against it.
they're paying their taxes and they're making Miami rich. He doesn't care.
Right. Do you think that like if people, creators kind of came out against him, painting over the LGBTQ murals and stuff, or like, came out against what he's trying to do with education, like the adult industry could actually be a powerhouse in getting Florida to be socially liberal again?
I don't know if the adult industry will ever speak out to that extent. At the end of the day, right, they rely on the number of members that they have, and they don't want to, split their membership in half. So I don't ever see that happening. If they do, great, fantastic. And I can definitely see Ron DeSantis, saying something about it and getting more involved in it. Just the same way when Disney spoke out against his, don't say gay, right, law. So he started attacking Disney, right? So I can definitely see him doing the same thing if the adult industry starts speaking out, but I just don't see the adult industry doing that.
Right. I mean, I think it's like there's been so much increase in tolerance over the past like 10, 15 years, like, and adult entertainment, um you know tattoos, like tattoos used to be taboo, but now there's a lot of people like doctors and teachers
Yeah.
who openly have tattoos, like it's a lot easier to be a member of the LGBTQIA community than it was 20 years ago. you know um you know Cannabis, like if you're a social cannabis consumer, that's
Yeah.
100% fine. And like but like that wasn't you know as socially acceptable 20 years ago. But so like we've come so far when it comes to social acceptance,
Yeah.
but at the same time it's a lot harder to live. Like if only we could get the economy of the 90s back with today's social acceptance, we'd reach
Ah,
utopia.
that'd be a freaking utopia.
Yeah.
That'll be amazing. And a lot of that has to do with social media, right? I think social media has spread acceptance a lot. At the end of the day, I'm probably one of the few people left that would talk about social media for me does more good than harm. I feel like a lot of people have now said no, social media does a lot more harm than good. Um, but a lot of that tabooness of anything in general, right? Like even if you go something as simple as even like nerd culture, right? Like I used to get picked on for liking comic books. Now that's socially acceptable, right? Like, so uh I think the more people are aware of it and the more people are part of a community, the easier it is to talk about. And that goes a little towards the adult industry too. Now, I think I have seen a shift in social media of adult industry in terms of the mental health effects of it, right? Um, I think a lot more men are relying on it. And I think it's impacting relationships. But that's a complete separate subject altogether, right? It's more of a mental health thing than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like when it comes to stuff that's entertaining but addicting, we just need to have the right like regulations in place. I mean, like if you look at like sports betting, for example, like that
Yeah.
used to be, strictly like prohibited. Like it was only a Vegas thing, but New Jersey's Chris Christie said we want to be able to have sports betting in Jersey, and then the Supreme Court paved the way for it in 2018. Now it's everywhere in Massachusetts and Florida, but there's also been some reports of people developing gambling addictions and losing a lot of money. So like we need to also have resources to say keep it as like a fun pastime, not something that you're going to, you know, get addicted to or blow uh, your life savings on.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
there's still some, like, again, red states making it difficult to access websites. You can't access, there's no apps for it, right? You can't download an adult industry app on your phone, right? Like there's still a lot of restrictions. um
Right. And I know in Massachusetts, rightfully so, you can't use credit cards to increase to like add to your balance. Like it has to be debit cards, like no credit cards. That's a Massachusetts rule.
oh, is that for betting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like you
Oh,
can't use $100 on your credit card to add to your balance. Like it has to be on a debit card.
I didn't know that. That's good. I
Yeah,
don't bet.
actually, there was a sports gambling company that actually violated that. They started letting people upload their credit cards in Massachusetts, and then the Massachusetts Gaming Commission fined that
I mean,
company.
there's ways around it, right? You can just get like one of those. You can purchase a debit card where you can just charge the debit card up with a credit card, right? Like, and
Mhm.
you just use that debit. So there's ways around it, but at least if they're making it harder, right, for people, then at least it makes it better.
Right. All right. Well, this was an excellent discussion. Is there anything else you want to discuss before we conclude the episode
I just want to say, I know you mentioned cannabis real quick, but I just want to say it's total uh, bullshit that is not legal,
in
even in
Florida?
Florida. It's medical. It's medical marijuana, right? That's
Uh,
one. And also, I think it's total bullshit that abortion wasn't legalized, even though majority of the state wanted it.
right. And we talked about adult entertainers. A lot of adult entertainers have come out in favor, like they're using their platforms to advocate for women's bodily autonomy.
I
And
mean, when it was on the ballot, literally 57% of the state voted for
yeah,
it. And they're like, no, you needed 60. I'm like, what kind of BS rule is that?
right. But I think it's sad because there's going to be a lot of unnecessary and preventable casualties. And then when people see this, they're going to be like, it'll get over 60%, like either in 2026 or 2028. But it's these. It'll be shown that these tragedies that happen would have been preventable.
Yep. But yeah, that's all. All right. And go Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, well, I go Patriots, but both teams have something to prove, and it should be a fun game. And I still think Tua is your quarterback. You don't think so?
I've lost, you know, I never liked Tua. Even when he was having that amazing season, I was still very skeptical. Of course, I was cheering my ass out, but I still very much skeptical because I do believe the offense was built around him, and I think any quarterback can succeed if the team is literally built around you. But the successful quarterbacks, the one that actually wins Super Bowls, are the one that can improvise when needed. And Tua has never been good at improvising. Never. If you look at the details, he's never been good at improvising. If the line falls apart, if the receivers don't get open, if anything happens that's out of the ordinary, he just falls apart. And so we're seeing that now more now that I think defenses have understood the Dolphins' offense much better.
Yeah, and I mentioned on my previous podcasts the Dolphins invented Wildcat, and I'll never forget in 2008 when they came. The Dolphins were 0-2, Patriots were 2-0. Patriots were coming off an undefeated regular season.
Yep.
Dolphins were coming off a 1-15 season. I was in a pick'em league. where it's one and done. I picked the Pats over the Dolphins, and I got kicked out of the. I got knocked right out because the Dolphins put up 38 points.
Wildcat. Yep.
Yep, but then if you beat Belichick once, congratulations, but relish in it because you're not going to be able to do it again. Belichick then studied Wildcat, and then whenever the Dolphins tried Wildcat again, Belichick's D was right there. And then, do you watch college sports at all?
Yep.
I'm getting into college football. I've always been very into professional sports. I haven't really watched college as much, but now that my man Billy Belichick is coaching at UNC, and his defense gave up 48 points, but then in the second game they only gave up 3 points. And that just goes to show you if you get punched and knocked down, you got to get back up and punch back.
And you know what? And you again, he's getting adjusted to the different speed that's required in college football, right? It's slower, and it's UNC's never been a good college football team, so I think he's getting adjusted to that. And okay, I'll ask you this: do you think those years with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, do you think it was more Tom Brady than Bill Belichick, or do you think it was more Bill Belichick than Tom Brady?
You know, it's that's a very good question. And Jim Browdy, a talk show host up here in Massachusetts, even said that when the Patriots fell to 4-13 in 2023, Browdy was like, "For all these years, we've been saying Brady and Belichick. Well, was it Brady and Belichick, or really was it just Brady?" It's like some people have said it's a science experiment. If you take one out, can the other still succeed? Brady succeeded in Tampa, but the furthest Belichick got the Patriots was the wild card round of the playoffs. I'm going to counter that and say it was a mix of both. Um, One reason, I mean, in Belichick's defense, when Brady got injured in the first quarter of 2008, the Patriots still went 11-5 that year with Matt
That's
Cassel
true.
as our quarterback. We actually marched down to Miami and beat you guys 48-28.
That's
And Matt
yep.
Cassel put up 415 yards and three
I remember that. That
touchdowns.
was the first. That was the first season we went to the playoffs in a long. That was yeah,
Yeah.
and I remember that. Yeah.
And I'd say that it's
We won the AFC East that year, though.
yeah, over the tiebreaker. We were both 11-5, but you guys had the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
Uh, I would say a lot of those Super Bowl winning teams though had a lot of defense. Like the first three Super Bowl wins, it was you know some of the best
Yeah.
defenses the NFL has ever seen. Brady was just a very clutch quarterback and had a
True.
high quarterback IQ, and then Brady became the unstoppable machine. And then it was defense that was holding us back from winning a Super Bowl. But then once we had a Super Bowl caliber defense in 2014, when we signed Darrell Revis and developed all that talent, that's when we started winning Super Bowls again. And really, our last Super Bowl we won, Belichick's a Belichick coach defense only gave up 3 points in that Super Bowl. So I feel like Belichick has always been really created a lot of very strong defenses to complement Brady. So I think that's why I would argue that Belichick deserves the same amount of credit that Brady deserves for the Patriots' 6 Super Bowl titles in our 19 years of dominance.
Well, speaking of Brady, what do you think about him potentially dating Sydney Sweeney?
Are they?
Potentially, rumors are saying.
I'd be happy for him. I mean, I just
Yeah,
watched the
he's a
movie.
big Trump supporter.
Although he hasn't been as open or flashy about it though. Like I know Brady did not attend the Patriots visit to the White House in 2015 to visit Obama, and he never specified why. So that's when you could
Oh,
tell that
interesting.
he was a secret Republican. And then um, it is said too that he chose to play down part of the reason choosing Tampa was because there's no income tax down there. It's said that he's personally friends with Trump and DeSantis, but at the same time though, that's the only thing I dislike about Brady. But I will give him credit. It's not like Kurt Schilling when he helped break the Red Sox curse in 2004, and then he went and campaigned with George W. Bush. Like
Yeah.
a
I
lot of
mean, what I thought wasn't he like 2 months ago spotted sitting with Trump in like a suite, a FIFA World Cup suite or something like that?
Brady.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. I wouldn't be surprised. But at the same time, though, he Brady has said like when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, he had a tribute on Twitter to Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Okay.
and he in 2016 he, as well as a bunch of other people, including celebrities and politicians, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all signed a petition calling for an end to the U.S. war on drugs. And I feel like ending the war on drugs has bipartisan appeal now. And
Yeah.
then in 2017, when Trump attacked all the players for kneeling during the anthem, and then like he sent his then Vice President Pence into the Colts 49ers game, and then he had Pence like walk out when the anthem started as a way to protest. Like both Brady and Belichick said, like one, they actually took part with the other players like kneeling, and it was week 3 of the 2017 NFL season, and they said like even if they basically said, some players will always stand for the flag, like we 100% respect that, but like if a player wants to take a knee during the national anthem to protest, then they should have the right to do so. And that was part of, in 2016, Belichick actually said, like, kind of said congrats to Trump for winning the election because they had known each other personally. But then in 2020, he rejected the Presidential Medal of Honor from Trump, and it wasn't because he wasn't into politics. It was because he's like he even mentioned he's like I've talked to a lot of players about like the right to protest for social change, and that's very important and stuff.
All right. So I mean, he goes with what he believes in, and
It's
he sticks by it. That's fair.
so it's like a mixed bag with them.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else before I close it out?
No, that's it. I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm happy to join you anytime you'd like.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm also looking to improve the podcast and stuff. I got to try to like add sound effects and stuff. Next time you come on, maybe we'll have the Better Call
But
Saul song playing when you come on.
that'll be funny. Where do you normally post the podcast? Just out of curiosity.
Facebook and YouTube, but I'm also growing. Like I'm also creating reels, like specific parts of the podcast. I'm putting on Blue Sky
Okay.
and TikTok, Instagram. Like, because I've been told like some people will sit down and listen to an hour and a half of a podcast, but like this is especially true in America. There's a lot of Americans with short attention spans, so it's hard for them to sit down and hear everything. That's why I got to like label the podcast like at this time period we're talking about this, at this time period we're talking about this. If you want to fast forward, like go to this time period, and then also create reels and like shorts so people can um really hear specifically what they want to hear.
Yeah. That's a good that's a good idea.
Yeah, but I think to the viewers out there, you know, times when times seem dark, like with a lot of the stuff going on in the world today in our country, like if you get knocked down, if you get embarrassed, like Belichick did when 48 points got put up against him, do everything you can to bounce back because, as Tom Brady said, the comeback is always greater than the setback.
True. And I thought you were gonna say, if you get knocked down, do a Belichick then and get yourself a 24-year-old girlfriend. But all right,
Yeah. Hey, also let me add, I think it's remember when Kraft went to a happy ending in 2019?
yeah.
He's as a widowed man, as long as he was respectful, I don't think he
Exactly.
should be
Hey,
judged.
I don't care. It's your time, it's your money, it's your choices. As long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as you're not doing anything illegal, you do you, man. Be happy.
Absolutely. Definitely. All right. Well, this concludes today's episode. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you again.
Absolutely. All right. Hope everyone enjoyed this episode and stay tuned for many more episodes coming.
Thank you, Will.